Hi, I'm Allie with the Potomac Bead Company, and I'm going to show you how to do peyote stitch in a circular fashion using our SuperDuo beads. It's going to be we call it the Tubular Snakeskin SuperDuo Bracelet, because it is a little bit different than peyote because you're stepping up a little bit different, but it is going to give that same peyote effect, but because we're using the SuperDuos, it's going to move a lot quicker because they have two holes, and it's basically like skipping a bead by putting on two beads at a time. The other beads that I'm using just to get started are some 11O seed beads, and then I'm going to use some bead caps at the end. You can also use beads at the end of any of your tubular things. The other option is to put them together and make it a roll-on bracelet that you wouldn't actually have any ends. Because that is an option, I'm going to start out by adding a stop bead to my thread. So I've added a stop bead to my .008 wildfire beading thread, and I have on a size 10 English beading needle. The colors I've chosen are the opaque green in the SuperDuo, and in the 11O seed bead, I'm just using a matte opaque cream color. You're not going to see that a ton. You can work it into your project so that you do see it more, but I'm just going to use it at the beginning and the ends. To start out, you can choose how wide and how much in diameter, how thick you want your bracelet. I'm using 6 SuperDuos, and they are separated by 11O seed beads. So I have on a SuperDuo, 11O SuperDuo, the whole way back down to a stop bead that I've put on. If you're not sure of any of this terminology, check out our other videos. Some of our starter videos will get you the idea of how to put on the stop bead and about the different threads and needles and all of that. Because this is tubular, I'm going to be putting this into a tubular fashion. What I'm going to do is basically round this out, and I'm going to sew back through all of my beads. Sewing back through the 11O seed beads as well as the SuperDuos. And I'm going to pull that down to my stop bead as I sew through. Some people will have you tie a knot. I like to sew to put that stop bead on there. It just gives you an option in case you want to do it differently at the end and you're not sure how you want to finish it out yet. Once I get to the beginning of my loop, what I'm going to do is actually step up. To step up, I'm going to take my thread and my needle that are coming out of the bottom hole of one of my SuperDuos, and I'm going to go through the top hole of the SuperDuo. I'm going in the opposite direction that the thread is coming out. What that's going to do is sit my thread on the side of my SuperDuo bead. So you're going to end up seeing that thread there on the side. It almost looks like a little button. From now on, it's going to be pretty easy, and you're just going to be doing that same step-up fashion. The 11Os are just there to separate a little bit. Every time I'm coming out the top hole of one of my SuperDuos, I'm going to add a SuperDuo onto my needle and go through the top hole of the next bead in my circle. Again, a bead goes on, and I'm sewing through. I'm going to continue doing this the whole way around the circle. And when you first do it, it's going to make this like flowered look rather than a tubular shape. As you get into your third or fourth row, it's going to really start to take a tubular shape. With the 11O seed beads, when I do those as or 8Os, you can actually use a pencil or a knitting needle, different things to go in between to keep that tubular form. Once I'm ready to put on my last bead, and it's a little bit hard to see the stop bead here, I'll kind of move that out of the way. I'm getting ready to put my last bead on. I'm going to sew through the last SuperDuo in row number 1, as well as the first SuperDuo that I put on in the second row. That's going to pull it all together. And then finally, what I'm going to do to step up to add my next row is, again, just like I did in round number 1, I'm coming out of the bottom hole of my first SuperDuo that was set number 2, and I'm going to go through the top hole of that same SuperDuo. Again, this is going to have my thread showing on the side, and I do want to pull rather tight. It's going to make it look like a 3D flower now. And as I build this, these are going to turn to the side, so you're going to end up seeing the SuperDuos in a tubular fashion. As I go through round 3 then, it's going to continue in the same fashion the whole way. Putting a SuperDuo on, sewing through the next top hole of the SuperDuo that was in row 2. So you're going row 3 right now, and just sewing these in. I'm going to continue the whole way around here, adding 6 SuperDuos. And if I wanted this to be a little bit narrower, I could have added 4 instead of 6 at the beginning. And just kind of keep your tail out of the way. As I get again to my last bead in the row, I'm going to go through that last bead in row 2, through the first bead in row 3, which is the row that I'm working on, going through the bottom hole in that one, and that's going to round it out. Again, pull nice and tight, and then you're getting ready to turn in the opposite direction by going through that same SuperDuo, but going through the top hole in the opposite direction. I'm going to continue doing this, going around, going through the top hole and switching the whole way for my bracelet. So now that I've done a couple more rows, you can see the pattern that's creating. You will see the thread a little bit. Naturally, with a lot of tubular patterns, you will see the thread. So here you see that white thread in with those green, that light green bead. With the green beads, you're going to see that thread as well. If I was doing this on my own, I'd probably go with the green wildfire color, and that way you wouldn't see the thread a little bit more. But for our sake, you will see the thread, and especially right here in these 3 beads that I have already, that's where I'm stepping up my rows. You'll see those a little bit more. So I'm just going to do a short section to show you how I would close it off and add the ends. So I'm on my last row, say it was 7 inches long and I'm ready to be completed. I'm going to do the same thing where I'm coming out of a bead, and I'm going to step up by going through the top hole of the bead. And in place of my SuperDuos, I'm going to be adding my 11O seed beads. That's going to pull it nice and tightly together, and I'm just going to add 6 11O beads between the ends of my SuperDuos here, and that's going to close it up, so that way I don't have just these random SuperDuos here hanging. This is kind of closing it all together. On this then you can choose, like I said, to use a bead, or you can use caps. I'm going to use caps to show you how I close it off, and you can really use any sort of clasp that you want. So I've gotten back to the first row, and I'm just going to reinforce this whole thing by sewing again through that top hole of my beads and the whole way through all of my seed beads, and that's going to pull it nice and tight so that way it does gather a little bit at the ends, and I'm going to come out here at the end of it. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add my caps. So these are the caps that I've chosen. They're actually going to cover up most of my 11O seed beads. To add caps when you're doing the ends of tubular projects, and this would be the same for herringbone or peyote, I'm going to go through my clasp here and through my loop. And if I wanted to add a clasp, I could add it at this time too, go through a clasp or add a seed bead and then a clasp. What I'm going to do is just show you how to add a seed bead in its place. And this seed bead is not ideal, it's just something to show. But I'm using an 8O seed bead. You could use a 6O seed bead, you could use a 4mm bead, anything that's going to catch on the other side of the clasp, or the other side of the cap here. So it's going to catch on the other side of the cap. If I wanted to add a toggle at this point, I could add a toggle. Once I have that on, and for example's sake, I'll just put a ring on there so you can see how I attach it. I'm going to go back through that same seed bead that I'm coming out of, back through my cap, and what I'm going to make sure is that I'm coming out of a side that's opposite. So my thread is sewing in this direction, in a rounded clockwise direction, and coming out here. I want to go to the opposite side, and I'm going to sew in the opposite direction. What that's going to do is bring the end in here so that it's going to sit over top of my project, and it's going to kind of cover up the project. What I'm going to do is continue to sew. This cap has some holes in it. I could take advantage of that, but if you don't want to see the thread, then you're going to continue stitching along your project here. And if you're thinking about this as a clock, my thread was coming out at 12 o'clock and at 6 o'clock. I also want my thread to come out and to go through the clasp at 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock. So I'm making a cross section of my thread. I sewed through halfway through my tube. Again, I'm coming out my needle through the top bead there. You can use a wire protector if you want, if you're more comfortable with that rather than sewing right onto. I'm going to go to the opposite side of where I came out and pick up a bead and sew. So I'm going to be doing this 4 times to really pull that cap in there nice and tight. After I'm done the last time, what I'll do is I'll sew along my project to get rid of my thread. You're going to do the same thing on the other side as you add the cap there. Once I'm done adding my cap and I have my closure on, I'm going to sew down a couple rows and knot out. Down a couple, pick up some thread, knot along the way, down a couple, pick up some thread and knot away. But that's going to put that cap right on the end there. And then what I'm going to be able to do is put the cap on the other side and attach whatever sort of clasp I want. So thanks for watching our